Is this FC350 a good bike for beginners? No, it's terrible. Is it good for trail riding? Not really. In this video, I want to explain why I think that based on its characteristics and why you should or shouldn't get this bike. So this FC350, it's a 350 liquid-cooled motocross race bike. It's essentially the same as the KTM 350 SXF. The 2017 model here is fuel injected, and it's basically a 250 with an extra 100 cc. So if you want more power than a 250, but you don't want the extra weight and the fatigue from riding a 450, 350 is a great choice. This thing handles really well, and it feels like a 250 because of the engine, the less rotating mass than a 450, and these air forks make the front end feel really lightweight. It almost feels like a mountain bike compared to a 450. So why do I think this is a terrible beginner bike? Even though a lot of people choose to start on this or like a 450 or a 302 stroke. Well, there's a few reasons. One, it could be their buddies told them to. Maybe they have riding buddies that all have enduro or race bikes, so they said, you need to get what we have. Or just skip the beginner girl bike and just go right to the best bike or your dream bike, because you'll just have to sell that little girl's bike in a year anyway. Or maybe you got a really good deal on it. Or maybe you're used to riding street bikes with 150 horsepower, so what's 50 horsepower? That should be easy, right? But then you get on the trails or you start riding off-road and you find out, wow, 50 horsepower is a lot to control. The tires slide out easily. It's a lot of power to handle, and you start tensing up and death gripping the bars once you get into the woods. This 350 engine, it's very snappy, and it's tuned for high RPM horsepower. So it does have pretty good low-end torque, but it's very quick revving, very aggressive. So wham, 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 it really wants to just go. It wants to go fast, where a trail bike like a 250 air-cooled 4-stroke like a CRF 250F, it's very mellow, it revs slower, it's very easy to ride, very forgiving, and when you're starting out, it's not only easier, it's safer, and you can probably ride 3 times as long on that slower bike because you aren't getting pushed and pulled around a lot, and it doesn't want to jump out from underneath you and ride right into a tree. Next is the tall seat height. This isn't going to be a problem if you're like 6 feet tall or taller, but someone like me, 5'6", 27-inch inseam, it's really hard to get on this bike. See, I can barely touch the foot peg, and my left foot here is on tippy toes. Thankfully, there's no kickstart, but if you're riding tight trails where you might need to put a foot down, or if you're just scared of coming to a stop and tipping over, these bikes are really tall. Where a trail bike, they're 2, 3, 4 inches lower to the ground, giving you a lot more confidence when starting out. And then the suspension, full traveled, 12 inches of suspension, fully adjustable. That's awesome. When you're racing motocross or maybe racing off-road, it's very stiff. The motocross bike especially, it's the stiffest suspension from the factory. It's meant for doing big jumps. So when you're just learning how to ride, or when you're doing slow or technical trails, you're just casually riding 5, 10, 15 miles an hour, this suspension is not going to compress very much. It's going to bounce you around because it's meant to hit bigger jumps at faster speed. So you're going to be feeling every little bump, every little rock. It's going to deflect and bounce around. This is not only intimidating because the bike wants to dance around and slide out, but it's exhausting because you're feeling everything in your hands and your feet. It's great if you're doing racing, 20, 30 miles an hour, you're doing big jumps, but if you're just starting out without major mods like a softer shock spring, getting suspension revalve, I don't know everything that's involved with modifying or revalving the air forks, but it needs some major tuning to get it to be plush and comfortable at slow speeds. Next is maintenance and reliability. And these bikes, and most modern 4-stroke race bikes, anything like 2010 and newer, they're actually pretty reliable if you maintain them. You could get 50, 100, 200 hours fairly easily if you're just a casual trail rider and you're doing basic maintenance like oil changes, keeping the air filter clean. But compared to a trail bike, doing the same type of riding, you could get potentially thousands of hours before you even need to touch the engine. And you won't need to change the oil or do air filter changes as much because they don't have as much power and they aren't sucking in as much air and dirt because the air boxes are more enclosed than these kind of more open style motocross bike air boxes because they want a lot of air. It's also very loud compared to a trail bike. So if you have neighbors that you don't want to annoy, ones that might complain, these motocross bikes have a very loud, very barky exhaust. There are a couple aftermarket options which quiet it down, but it's still not going to be nearly as quiet as a stock trail bike exhaust. And then as far as price goes, something like this is going to be $3,000 to $6,000 depending on the year that you buy. And the nice thing about trail bikes is that they hold their value really well. So you could buy a 15-year-old trail bike, ride it for a couple of years, and then sell it probably for about the same price. Where something like this, a race bike, it's losing value every single year, if not faster than that. And it's going to be harder to sell generally because less people want a race bike. So trail bikes are generally higher in demand than a race bike. So can this be a good trail bike? Well, it depends on the riding you're doing. It depends on how many mods you do. You might want to add a flywheel weight, soften the suspension, maybe add an auto clutch, change the gearing. First gear is really tall, so it requires a lot of clutch work to get going in first gear. You got to be going like 7 miles an hour before you can put your feet on the pegs. And for riding tight and technical trails, you're going to overheat your bike very quickly unless you have a fan on it. So it's going to be spewing out coolant, you're slipping the clutch a lot. These four-strokes get hot quick if they don't have air flowing through them. Now, if you are an expert level racer or an expert level rider that wants to ride high-speed trails like 20, 30, 40 plus miles an hour, maybe you're out in the desert, something that requires stiffer suspension, lots of power, maybe you're riding in the sand, then this would be a good bike. It would be fun. But if you're just starting out, if you're a novice or even intermediates, you don't need this much power. Where I ride in the woods, you don't really need more than 20, 25 horsepower because you're going to be riding at 3,000 to 6,000 RPM, which is not where you make the most power. And if you are revving at that high, you're probably going to be spinning the rear tire. So if you realize that, maybe I don't want to get a bike like this, and you want a cheaper, lower maintenance bike, easier to ride, one that you can resell for about the same price, you should check out my video on the best beginner dirt bikes right here. And I hope you do, because I want you to stay safe. And when people start out on too much bike, they have too much bike syndrome, one that's too powerful, too stiff, too tall, too heavy, they're more likely to get hurt. And I know this because I hear from people just like you that leave comments or send me emails saying, yeah, I think I got too much bike. I smashed into a tree, or I'm just scared and intimidated to ride. Don't do that. Please, I want you to stay safe. I want you to have fun so you can trail ride with your family and friends for the rest of your life.